Unlike other cities where they have parks scattered about, Central Park is one giant slab tossed right in the center of Manhattan. It starts at 59th Street and goes all the way up to 110th Street when you hit Harlem. So there's over 50 streets of land to explore. To me, Central Park is like the lungs of New York City. I can't imagine what it would be without it. So today I want to show you around some of my favorite places here in Central Park. If you only have a day in Central Park or even just a couple of hours, I recommend starting in the southeast corner of the park. It's called the Pond. And what makes this area so beautiful is that you get this beautifully crafted green area surrounded by Manhattan's urban landscape. So the contrast between the two, I think, makes for a really awesome spectacle. So we just walked through the Howlett Nature Reserve. It's pretty cool. It's got all these winding paths and it'll take you some pretty cool views. And there's a bunch of birds here that you won't find anywhere else in New York City. Hey look, I found a turtle. So right behind me here you can see the Victorian Gardens. It's an amusement park built into Central Park. I mean, where else are you going to find that? This is kind of like the kids area. Behind me here you can see Sheep's Meadow. This part of the park got its name because it used to have tons of sheep that would be prancing around up until 1934, where they got moved to a different area of New York City. Most of the time you'll just see people reading a book or having a picnic, but there is a lot of key political and historic movements that have taken place right behind me here. A nice hidden gem within Central Park is the zoo, which is located on the east side. It's relatively inexpensive. The general admission is about $12 or so, but it really checks off most of the boxes in terms of what you'd expect. It's got grizzly bears, it's got penguins, it's got all sorts of exotic birds. If you are looking for a bigger park, I would head up to the Bronx and check out the Bronx Zoo. But if you're here in Manhattan, for $12, I'd say it's pretty worth it. Behind me here is one of my favorite parts of Central Park. It's called the Mall. It's basically a straight open walkway. It's clearly man-made because trees don't grow in straight lines. Not only will you see all these different sculptures in this area, including people like William Shakespeare and Christopher Columbus, but every day you'll see people drawing caricatures out here, and you'll also hear tons of different musicians performing as well. As you make your way north along the mall, you're eventually going to run into one of the gemstones here at Central Park called the Bethesda Terrace and Fountain. And they even have underneath this beautiful arcade where you can see these Victorian English tiling on the ceiling. On top of the fountain, you'll see the Angel of Water. The water in New York City didn't always used to be great. In fact, there was a huge cholera epidemic which discouraged a lot of people from moving into the city. And if you don't have clean water, it's hard to build your city because it's hard to get people to live in your city. Eventually, water was transplanted from the Croton River in Westchester County, and it helped to purify the water. And a lot of people think this is the fountain from the opening of Friends, but it's actually not. That one's out in California. And as you can see behind me here is the Boathouse. So we can see people on rowboats riding along on the lake here and under the boat bridge, which I'm going to take you to next. To get a better view of Boat Bridge, I recommend crossing over into the Ramble. Boat Bridge is probably the most famous bridge within Central Park. There's no doubt that you've seen it in a number of movies and TV shows. In fact, I worked on an episode of Broad City where we shot here in Central Park, which was pretty cool. Now the Ramble is where I am right now. It's a wooded area that's much different from the rest of Central Park up until that point. The southern part of Central Park was supposed to reflect Manhattan. It was supposed to be well organized and elegant and ritzy, whereas when you get to the northern part of Central Park, it's much more like upstate, much more mountainous terrain, and it's much more rugged. Walking around the Ramble, you forget you're in New York City. I mean, look at this place. It's almost like we're in the Adirondacks or something. And the cool thing is, this schist rock you see behind me here is actually 400 million years old. So when Olmsted and Vaux won the bid to get the contract to build Central Park, one of the things they had to include was a way for traffic to cut through the park. You can see the traffic is right down here and it's super quiet, because it goes through these little underpasses that are underneath Central Park. So behind me here you can see the ancient Egyptian obelisk. It's over 3,500 years old. It was transported from Cairo, it was shaped up by the Romans, and eventually made its way to the United States. Behind me here we can see one of America's most influential founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton. This is a man who really came from nothing. He came from the Caribbean in poverty, but he would eventually grow up not only to fight in the Revolutionary War and become George Washington's right-hand man, made America what it is today, especially in New York City. One of the prettiest parts of Central Park, in my opinion, is right next to the conservatory water. It's also known as the Sailboat Pond. You can rent one of these sailboats, which are controlled with a remote control, and you can ride them around the water.
So this turns the rudder. My boat is kind of like moving this way, and then when I turn it this way, it moves in the opposite
Which one is your boat, son?
Number 7.
So I just took a walk through Shakespeare's garden. Every flower that you see out here is referenced in one of Shakespeare's plays. They have these little placards that show exactly where it's from. You can see if the poetry stands up to the real imagery. When most people think of Central Park today, they think of an urban planning masterpiece. But when the land was first purchased by New York City, it was rough, to say the least. Most of the fields were barren, almost entirely treeless because the British had cut down the trees during the Revolutionary War, both for fuel and to rebuild their ships. And so the fields were basically barren. There were swamps all over the park. There were animal slaughterhouses, and it just wasn't a very clean place to live. So I just passed 85th Street along the West Side Highway. And this was the former location of Seneca Village, a predominantly African-American community, but also an Irish community. And you have to understand that back in the mid-1800s in New York City, if you were African-American, it was extremely hard to find housing. There was serious discrimination, and Seneca Village was one of the few places that Black people could find housing in New York. However, in 1857, due to the use of eminent domain, this community was forced to clear out and find housing elsewhere. The biggest body of water in Central Park is the Jacqueline Onassis Reservoir, which you can see behind me. This is a great spot to take a stroll, take a jog. Every day you'll see people out here getting some exercise in, taking a walk. A lot of people might tell you that the best parts of Central Park are in the southern half. However, right now I'm at the northeast tip overlooking the Harlem Meer, which you can see behind me here. And there are plenty of fish for you to try and catch. Even if you don't have a fishing rod, you can rent one here in Central Park. And as long as you don't take the fish with you, it's a catch and release program, you won't get a $75 summons. So right now I'm walking through the North Woods. It's near Harlem. Again, it's one of these places where you just forget that you're walking through New York City. I just walked past this water fountain that they had, and I just can tell already that the paths are really rugged and woody and very cool. Central Park has definitely seen its ups and downs. In the 70s and 80s, the park was just covered in graffiti. There's trash everywhere, and it was known for a place where you'd get pickpocketed a lot. A couple of different philanthropy groups got together to form Central Park Conservatory. A lot of people think that most of the funding that goes into maintaining and restoring the park is actually from public funding, but only about 25% of public funding helps to make the Central Park nice and clean. The other 75% comes from private funding from this philanthropy group that I was talking about called the Central Park Conservatory. They've done a really good job just keeping the park clean, and well, kudos. Well, that's all for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tour of Central Park, and if I forgot anything, make sure to include it in the comment section below. Don't forget to click the like, share, and subscribe buttons. As always, I'm Robbie Frank. Safe travels, and I'll catch you next time.